thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm Doug Duncan, President and CEO of Leadership Greater Washington. I want to welcome you to another of our Frontline Conversations with leaders in the Washington region to discuss COVID, to discuss the righteous unrest, to discuss things that are happening now, and there is a lot happening in terms of the unrest, the COVID, the economy, and climate change. We've got four major crises that are facing us right now. And first, let me start by asking, how are you doing personally?
It's funny. That is always the most interesting question. I know you start with that one, and it probably is the hardest question of all because how is anyone doing right now, right? I think if you ask me 1 minute, it's like, I'm okay. I'm okay. We can do this. I'm all right. Top of the world. And then the next minute, it's just, no words. I think that is reflective a little bit of the news cycle around all of this. It's been a lot. It's been exhausting. It's been fulfilling. It's been constant. And I think that word constant is probably the most constant of themes. But I personally am doing all right. I'm just trying to keep up. I'm just trying to keep my team motivated. I'm just trying to keep everyone happy and not burned out.
So how are you working from home?
Yes.
Do you go to the office at all, or?
No, we haven't been back since mid-March. It was basically, it's almost overnight. I think it was for everybody else. We came home, and from then on, it was reporting from home. All of our reporters are reporting from home. Any one of you guys might have gotten a Zoom call from these guys. We're putting out the paper from home. Our print, the days that we go to the printer, our deadline days are Wednesdays, and so those are very long days from home. But, in a sense, that's a little better than very long days in the office. I mean, I do get to sort of sneak away and, see the kids, which is nice. I'm sharing this. This is my family room. I'm sharing this room with my 7-year-old and his camp, which is basically like 25 screaming children in the background. With talking about dinosaurs and NASA, and that's been fun. But it's nice. It's kind of nice. I mean, as much as I'm breaking up fights, in the middle of the day, on deadline between my children, it's nice to also sort of step away and see them and ask how they're doing and have a conversation with them in the middle of the day. It's not something I'm used to doing.
So what's it like putting out a paper from remote locations? It's got to be quite a change for everyone. Was there good adjustment to it, or did you have some time?
Oh, yeah. No, it took some adjustment. The first week that we did it, again, this was all overnight, so none of us had sort of a chance to immediately adjust. We're one of 43 business journals around the country. Actually, our newest one is in Cleveland. For anyone who has any Cleveland connections, we have a new business journal in a Cleveland market, so look out for that. But we had basically, the first week, had tried to do this entirely off of our servers, which are based in Charlotte. And so there were a lot of sort of delays, or a lot of sort of, and everyone, all the markets at the same time on Wednesdays are trying to do this. So that was a little bit of a challenge. The first week, I think we finally put out the paper and sent the last page to the printer here in Washington. I mean, it was the 10 o'clock hour for sure, which is well past our deadline. But since then, our corporate office has been very mindful of what the challenges have been. And they've been, I mean, the nice thing about being one of 43 business journals around the country is that you have a corporate office that is trying to help sort of ameliorate the situation for all of us. And they have resources and they have help sort of and systems and processes in place that they can, spread across all of our markets. So we sort of switched our systems and we're kind of doing it over the cloud, which has been a lot better. And it still has its challenges. It's still not easy. It's still not as easy as it is in the office, but it's a lot easier than it was when we first started.
So did you have to drop a lot of stories and shift to COVID coverage, or how are people, you have a perspective of the region from a business point of view. You cover the business community throughout the region. And what was it like shifting all the coverage to COVID to start with? And the effect on your time?
Yeah, no, and again, we're talking overnight, we're talking immediate, sort of what that shift was like. I mean, what's been difficult is that, a newsroom, and I think anyone can tell you this in the news business, we're a very collaborative group. We're constantly talking to each other. We're yelling at each other. We're yelling over cubes. We're talking about the latest happening in the story, a news break. We're brainstorming on whiteboard. We're meeting in the office. We're huddling around cubes to constantly talk about stories or the next iteration of stories, or what the latest is. I mean, it's a very back and forth type of environment, which, remotely and on Zoom sort of puts a halt to that, right? So you have that sort of challenge in sort of our working environment to start with. And then, yeah, I mean, if you had gone to our office, we had maybe 2 months worth of cover stories or centerpiece packages planned out ahead of time that we were, pushing toward, which is great. And then COVID just erased that completely because nothing felt right or relevant anymore. The things that we were sort of looking further ahead at, the mandate is now to sort of say what's happening immediately. And I think, our mission is to focus on local business. You have a lot of media organizations in Washington. You have a lot of media organizations around the country, but ours is very unique in that we focus so specifically on local business and what the impact on local business is. And this has been nothing if not a local business story. Every human being, every individual, every resident, every business, every entrepreneur, large to small, Fortune 100 to one-man shops, I mean, they've all been affected by COVID. So the challenge was trying to get your arms around that, trying to stay true to our mission, on what is most important to local business and local business executives and owners and entrepreneurs, but also make some sense of what was happening. And the pace at the very beginning was, it was damn near impossible to try and keep up. I mean, we would have a story, we would report something at 9 a.m., but that by noon was already moot. Things had already transformed. We started to, very soon after we started working from home, we started doing sort of what we call our morning roundup and our morning edition newsletter. One of our editors who does it calls it the morning briefing, but it's basically everything you kind of need to know for that day that's happened just in the previous, 12 hours that sort of changed, the world and the region and the business community. And then by like the middle of the afternoon, we realized we needed a whole new afternoon roundup because things were moving at such a fast pace. Like you got up to get a glass of water and 4 more jurisdictions shut down completely. So, staying on top of that, our mission again is to, for any news organization, it's to look around the corner, as much as possible. It's to sort of look ahead at what the next story is and to analyze, to assess, to interpret, to forecast, and all of that is impossible in an environment where even the experts, the foremost leading experts of any region of the country are kind of like, I've never seen this before. I don't know what to do. I don't know what this means. I don't know when this will end. So it's been challenging to try and be sort of the voice, for local business or to answer questions when so much is left unanswered. But we're also very fortunate to be in a position to try and do that, and to try and help push the business community through this and navigate through this. I mean, if there was ever a time that the business community needed sort of news and information, it's now. And so we feel very lucky to be in that position, but it's definitely been a challenge.
So you talked about the morning roundup, which seems like it changed into an hourly roundup as the days went on and news changed. And then you also talked about collaboration. How do you keep this collaboration going with your people while the news is happening so quickly? Do you find yourself reacting to stories, or have you been able to plan out some things in terms of what you're going to cover and how you're going to shape the coverage?
Yeah. I mean, certainly in the beginning, it was a lot more, reactive because again, things were changing so fast. Is a lot more of just trying to relay information, is just trying to relay what the latest news is so that businesses could know what is happening now as opposed to what's happening next. No one knew it was. So internally, I mean, our communication system, I mean, we're all on Slack. The newsroom is very, very active. We're constantly talking to each other. It's it sounds like we're in the next room, which is nice. It's a good immediate information tool. We have various sort of channels within Slack. So, the editors are all talking constantly. Everyone associated with the print product and the paper is talking constantly. What that means, from my perspective is there are constantly 12 conversations happening at any given moment. So, sort of juggling all of that and making sure I'm sort of being responsive to everyone, is sort of my first priority and my challenge. But then we're on Zoom calls. We're having staff meetings, editors meetings. I'm constantly just sort of, hey, do you have a minute? And we'll get up on a call and sort of talk about the latest story or the latest package or anything like that. It has been a little bit, of late, easier to sort of take a step and breathe and try and plan more ahead. The pace is not what it was, certainly. But the difficulty is still that there's still a lack of clarity, right? I think we're still in an environment where people still don't have answers. I mean, are we in a second phase of coronavirus infection rates? Did we ever leave the first phase? Where are we with reopening? Should we be reopening? What should offices do? What should businesses do? I mean, you talk to 20, I mean, even before COVID, you could talk to 20 people and have 20 different answers or points of research, but now it's amplified. It's even more so. So there's still a lack of clarity. There's still a lot of questions out there and still very few answers, but we are at least at a point where we can do more and better planning, and we have been, and we've been definitely trying to connect some of those dots and tell some deeper stories with our cover stories and our centerpiece packages. But yeah, it's still a lot. The latest, it always seems like something new, is sort of dropped on you, certainly in the news business lately. But the latest is obviously the new data around the Paycheck Protection Program that the SBA has released yesterday, and it is a gigantic data dump, essentially, that we've been sort of working our way through yesterday and today and this week, and that'll be a big point of focus for us in coverage going forward. I mean, I think the PPP has been a major point of focus for us at the Business Journal, at the Washington Business Journal, because again, that is something so germane to local business. And it's something that we've been able to contribute and sort of lead for even the whole country, which is nice. Our banking reporter has been sort of a lead reporter on the PPP for all the markets across the American City Business Journals Corporation, which is really nice for us.
So I want to ask you for some answers when you said nobody has the answers. But before I do that, I want to ask, do you prefer working from home? Do you want everybody back in the office? We had a lot of people say that, gee, this working from home works out, we're more productive, we're getting more things done, there's better cooperation. What's it like for you? Where do you want to be?
Where am I on that spectrum? I miss being in the office and being able to pull someone to my desk or go to someone's desk and be like, hey, have you thought of this? Or, when it comes to sort of the news business and writing and reporting, I mean, it's like when something pops in your head, you want to address it with that person. You want to, things move quickly, right? So, even in a normal state, of affairs, things can move quickly on a story. So it's nice to have that ability to have immediate conversation, and not have to set up a Teams appointment, or, figure out, a Slack channel or something, and worry that your message isn't quite getting across in the right way. So I do miss that. I miss the ability to sit in our office, our creative services, our design layout, our photography, our editors, our reporters, and just talk through a story, and all the elements. I miss that. I miss a lot of that collaboration. Now, anyone who knows me also knows I'm a pretty severe introvert. And so you have on that spectrum, I'm pretty far on this side. It's like a group of introverts are like, look at her in the corner. I mean, I'm not, if it were just me, myself, and I'm a hunker. I'm okay with sort of being in this space. I'm okay working in this space, but this is also not our best form of work at the Washington Business Journal is together. But the first priority has to be, our first priority, like any business in Washington, any business around the country, is just to make sure everyone's safe. So we're not in any rush to get back. We just want to make sure everyone is safe, their family is safe. That's number one.
So Fred Walls has a question about all the technological change, the Zoom meetings, all the other things we're doing to take the place of being able to get together in person. And how do you think that has changed the news industry? Where do you think the news industry is going to wind up? And it's safe to be, when you have a vaccine, it's safe to be back together. Has it changed forever?
I think it'd be naive to think that some element of everything that we do hasn't changed forever. We were very much, we were an organization that was very present in the office. Like we were, again, there's so much that we do that we're bouncing off of each other constantly, that it was important to be in the office, right? To be able to have that sort of chemistry, to have that sort of discussion, to have that sort of constant conversation. We are now getting accustomed to being able to work this way remotely. And I think that there might be some demand, to do that going forward, maybe longer term. I don't know if that's what we will do. I don't know exactly how things might change, but we have figured out a way, obviously, to put out the paper remotely, and send our pages to the printer and have a paper at the end of it. So we may be doing more interviews this way, perhaps down the line, even after a vaccine is developed and distributed. I'm among the group that just can't be sure what this means for us going forward. But I also do think that because so much of what we do is, incumbent upon us trading ideas and us trading information. We're in the information business, we're in the communications business. I think so much of that still relies on that constant conversation that I don't think we will ever go fully. I don't think there's a chance of ever going fully. I don't think, again, we would do our best work fully, forever. But, there may be certainly elements of our job that do. And I just don't know that. I don't know if that's the route that we end up taking ourselves. We're a small operation. That's the other thing with the challenge around this. We have 7 reporters cover all of Greater Washington's business community. And, it's a very small team. I've said before, we're small but mighty. So much of what we do and so much of the news business is built on relationships, built on building trust, built on, good or solid or substantive interactions with other people, right? So it'd be hard to do that well, without being able to build those relationships and have that sort of interaction with sources, with business owners, with executives. So something will change. It'll be different, but I can't see us being entirely different.
So Carrie Ann Hamilton has a question about what you call the data dump from the SBA on the PPP. Is that data sufficient? Do we need more data from them, or does this give you enough to tell us what really happened with that program?
Where the money went. I mean, that's the mantra, right? Follow the money. It's all as it always has been. It is not sufficient. It is nowhere near sufficient. It is welcome to this degree, sure. I mean, any information is better than no information. But what the SBA has released is anyone who got a loan above $150,000, and they've categorized them within ranges of amounts, right? So it's like 150,000 to 300,000, or et cetera, up to 5 million to 10 million. That's a huge range. So it's impossible to kind of say, what amount any individual business or organization might have gotten. It's also, you can see a lot of sort of discrepancies in the data as you go through it to clean it up. I spent a lot of time yesterday trying to do that for Greater Washington, because we're pulling not just DC data, but suburban Maryland data and Northern Virginia data out of sort of the larger Virginia chunks and the larger Maryland chunks. And so that's concerning. I mean, there are already some companies or organizations that have come out and said that they never applied for a PPP loan, and yet they are listed in this database. So, for any news organization, that's concerning. But most importantly, there's a lot of information that was left off. So, individual companies or organizations that got loans below 150,000, which is the bulk of organizations that got a PPP loan. The average loan was about $104,000. So that a majority, and most of the small businesses that we've talked to in Greater Washington, I mean, it was well below that number. There isn't much more clarity in terms of the loans that were distributed in those amounts, and to whom and by whom. And also, one major concern with the program has been, in sort of the rush to fund and the rush to funding, you had a lot of, larger organizations that were taking part in the program and receiving funding, or organizations that maybe were venture-backed or publicly traded, or organizations that don't reflect some of the biggest needs, which are maybe more of the underserved communities, or again, those entrepreneurs of color, or women-owned companies, or truly the smallest of the small businesses, where a lot of the pain was being felt. And the demographic sort of information that the SBA collected on all of these appears to have been optional, because it doesn't indicate a lot of that information that, could tell us, who some of these businesses are. And so I feel like that's sort of missing a big chunk of the story as well. And so it's not the full story with even this data dump. There's a lot more that we're looking for. The Washington Business Journal, and actually all of our markets, the American City Business Journal, our parent organization, is part of a lawsuit, along with other media organizations, filed against the SBA to be fully transparent with all of this data. And so we're still waiting for that lawsuit to move forward. But, the SBA has been transparent with its other loan programs. It needs to be transparent with this one too, because funding moves fast, and you want to make sure that it sort of went to the right, and to the, down the right avenue.
So the Business Journal not only reports on the regional business community, but it also has played a very important role in bringing regional leaders together. Lisa Rother has asked this question. So your book of lists, your Women Who Mean Business, your Minority Business Leaders, all those events that celebrate the leaders in our region, What happens to those, and when do you think we'll be able to get back together again? Or do you think we'll ever be able to get back together again to celebrate that? Much as we're sort of wrestling at LGW about our class and our awards dinner and all those other things.
Yeah, I think this is a perennial question for any organization that held events, which has been a big part of our model. It absolutely has been, because I think, again, so much of what we do is building relationships. And that's along all facets of our company, of our organization. I obviously am just overseeing the newsroom, the editorial side, but everything that we do is built on building these relationships. And that's been really hard. It's been very hard. We are continuing with a lot of our awards programs and our recognition programs. So we will have our 40 under 40 package and sort of special publication in our July 31st issue. We will have our Business of Pride issue. We will have a Veterans in Business issue. We will have our Women Who Mean Business program still. We will have these. They will certainly be print publications. The challenge remains how to engage everybody virtually in an event. We have done and are doing and will continue to be doing sort of, panel discussions and sort of editorially based, content events like that, where we're inviting people to speak or serve on a panel. But sort of the celebratory awards events, it's very hard to beat, the 300 or 500 people in a room celebrating someone walking across the stage and picking up a plaque, for their success in business. And we are trying to figure out how to do that and how to do that well, as are all of our markets around the country. But it is really important to us. So it's still, stay tuned. But these programs are absolutely happening. We still have nomination forms on our website to submit for a lot of these programs, or have had them. They're really still important to our model for sure, and our audience and us.
So Vandana, let's get some answers from you now. How have we done as a region dealing with COVID?
I think it's been really interesting. We're very unique, this region, and compared with other major metros and markets around the country where, it's three major jurisdictions having to sort of align themselves together. Unlike others where you have a single state, in a single, major city, maybe who are sort of making single decisions that, have to align. We are, between DC, Virginia, and Maryland, having to make sure that we're sort of lock and step, right? And that's been interesting to watch. I think that there has been a lot of alignment. I think that clearly they're talking to each other, which is good to see. I know in all of our conversations with businesses, with business owners, with workers, there is still a lot of concern about reopening and reopening too fast. A lot of businesses that have been talking to us, we have submitted polls and included their responses in the newspaper. We have done interviews with one-on-one, profiles of small businesses. We have, talked to our best places to work honorees. We have just through all of our conversations, the majority of people and business owners and employers are still very concerned about reopening and what that looks like and whether to do it. The sense that we're getting, we're going to have, in this week's paper, a lot of coverage about, again, sort of what the office looks like. It'll look very different. There's going to be a lot of, distancing. There's going to be a lot of rejiggering of office spaces. There's a lot of, there are some conversations about what happens to office spaces, down the line. But a lot of what we're hearing is that no one's in a rush yet quite come back. A lot of employers are saying, we're letting our employees decide, as I said earlier that we are. It's 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 not just a business issue; it's a health issue, and that's a hard thing to sort of to rationalize around.
So I thought the region had coordinated very well until recently, where Virginia now is saying, let's go ahead with phase 3.
Yeah.
Being places across the country that had opened up restaurants and other places, shutting them down again. So I'm not sure that's the right thing to do. But
One of our recent cover stories was about restaurants because of indoor dining, basically. And at that time, it was even just 50% capacity. And even at 50% capacity, the restaurants we were talking to were saying, yeah, we're allowed to do 50% capacity, but maybe 20% of people are even coming in, or even choosing to come in. I mean, you can sort of open up all you want, but there's a lot of concern on the individual level of whether we want to go out, right? Of whether workers want to come back to the office, of whether diners want to come back to restaurants and to bars. I mean, you will have people doing it. We had a whole section in the paper about how to wear a mask and why that's important. I think that is something that continues to get lost, and that concerns me because it literally, the stat was, I mean, if a majority of people wore masks, that could limit the spread of the infection by like 80%. Masks can limit the spread of the infection, by upwards of 90% person to person, which is, a major, avenue of how the disease is spread. So I don't know that we're there yet. I don't know that we're there yet for sort of a full reopening. A lot of people are still waiting for a vaccine. And a lot of the concerns and fears are still where they were. They haven't come down.
Well, it's fascinating to me because what we're seeing is, it goes back to President Kennedy's comments that ask what the country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And what we're hearing from a lot of people is, how dare you infringe on my rights to breathe on anyone I want, to spit on anyone I want, to do, instead of what can I do to help the greater community? What can I do to help this country? And we're just not seeing the leadership out there saying, let's all step back some and realize we're hearing it from Dr. Fauci. Let's step back and do things to help our neighbors. It's more, how dare you infringe on any right that I might have? And it's really this whole on your own society that I've been fearful of for some time, where it's, those who have, and those who don't, it's their fault and tough luck. I'm just very concerned about that and sort of where we're headed.
Right. And I think there has to be sort of a thought given to sort of the short term and the long term, right? I mean, short term, everyone, I mean, when you see such a loss of revenue and such a loss of business, it is absolutely understandable to say, I need to open up. I need to be able to open that avenue of revenue again. It's for survival. I mean, everyone's hurting. The foundational fact here is that everyone is hurting. The pain has been incredibly widespread. It's been heartbreaking. It's been just painful to see in terms of layoffs, furloughs, lost revenue, shuttered businesses. The effect on small business is absolutely painful. So yes, short term, the instinct is to want to reopen those avenues for revenue. But again, it's like you can reopen, but will they come? And I honestly think that there's there's not enough evidence to say that people are going to return with their dollars, back at your doors, the second you open them. I think there's still a lot of carryout. There's still a lot of curbside. There's still a lot of contactless. And as there should be, because, I mean, there's the business case for being more cautious for the long term, because you reopen, you spend all that money on PPE. It's a lot of expense for businesses to reopen right now. It's not easy because of the thousands of dollars that they have to spend on masks and equipment for their workers, for customers, to spend on sanitizing and cleaning. And the sort of pace between customers is so much the volume has to be smaller, even without, the mandate from state, because you have to spend so much time cleaning in between. It's expensive, and to spend that much and still see a drop in revenue is still heartbreaking, and so I don't know that there's enough even of a business case that people are seeing yet, to even justify it, like a faster reopening.
So we had Kathy Hollinger, the head of the Restaurant Association region, as our first guest on these Frontline Conversations. And the statistics she gave us were just devastating in terms of 85, 90% of the employees who've been laid off from restaurants across the region. They're getting 8 to 10% of the normal revenue that they had gotten. It's just devastating news. We hope to have her back on in a little bit to give us an update on where we are, what's happening with that. But you're right, it has been devastating for all kinds of small businesses around the country. And I'll just make one final comment about these masks. The thing that really upsets me, and I think it does you too, is that the purpose of the mask is not to protect yourself, it's to protect others. So we're asking people to do something to look out for their neighbor. And they're saying we can't even do that. That's a very sad state. So we've gone through COVID, we're still going through COVID. It looks like we're going to be with COVID for quite some time. We're now saying that indoor air may harbor the virus for a lot longer than we had thought. But during all of that, we had unrest. We saw the murder of George Floyd, and it really ignited something across the country and has led to demonstrations and protests around the world in terms of people's rights and people being protected by the police as opposed to being abused by the police. So how did your coverage shift then, and what have you heard from the business community in terms of their reaction to this and things they're doing? What lessons are they teaching others about dealing with this unrest and dealing with equity issues?
Yeah, no, this has been sort of an equally urgent issue, in my mind, if not even more so, because I think this speaks to sort of the crux of our community and society. This is a conversation we actually at the Business Journal this is a conversation that had been important to us, even before the terrible murders, George Floyd. This is something that we have been trying to cover or get into. I mean, even my predecessor, Doug Freeling, who was editor-in-chief before me, it has been a mission of ours to make our coverage more comprehensive, make our coverage more representative, because, I mean, I think the one thing, it's not, the solutions to this is not just one thing here and one thing here. It's sort of systemic change, right? It requires systemic change for all of us, including us at the Washington Business Journal. It's an effort that we had. In fact, in February, the Washington Business Journal we held our first ever, it was an economic forecast forum. It was an event that we had and we had a corresponding cover story in February at that time too, where our focus, the entire focus of that event and of that cover story was on the economic disparities that still are plaguing this region. And we're one of the wealthiest regions, not just in the country, but really in the world. And yet the economic disparities are stark, and they continue to be, and they haven't gotten better over the course of 10 years, 20 years. And that's unacceptable. That's not progress. Because so long as we have even portions of our community that aren't feeling the parity, aren't feeling the economic equity, then we collectively can't rise. And so we had a cover story around that. Amy Liu from the Brookings Institution had given a presentation at that event that really focused on this and how to make economic development more inclusive. So, we have this amazing Amazon HQ2 win. We ended the year, in 18, and we kind of, saw all this progress, and we were celebrating this, how far the region has come, certainly in diversifying our economy with a great new tech player. But unless, the benefits and the rewards of that are inclusive, then you're still having wealth concentrated in certain pockets, and that's not doing this business community, and that's not doing our community at large any good. So that was something that I was actually meant to sort of start, set the stage and start sort of a framework of a conversation about these economic disparities that we were going to sort of continue and to delve into and have over time. And then we have this sort of turning point. And I do think it's sort of a turning point because George Floyd is not the first. He hasn't been the last. I mean, by far. I mean, the facts are the number of incidents like this are countless. It's I think just the exhaustion of the nation of reading this yet again and facing this and answering this question yet again that sort of led to maybe a more amplified response than we might have seen in years past. But I think what the difference is here that is giving me hope is that the response from the business community is more than I've ever seen before. And I think if change is going to happen, the change has to happen. It has to start with the business community. It has to start with sort of the centers of wealth. It has to start with the centers of influence. It has to start with the centers of power. And, the business community is where the money is. Money drives decisions. Good business cases drive decisions, right? And if the business community gets behind the need for change, for systemic change, and again, this applies to all of us collectively, no one is immune, then I think we could actually finally see change. Like we were seeing responses from businesses large and small, coming out and voicing opposition to systemic racism and acknowledgement of systemic racism. And we were seeing, across the industries, across geographies, and across racial lines, we're seeing from white leaders an acknowledgement that things need to change. And again, the more we see that, I think the more opportunity there is to make real change. And so we at the Business Journal are really trying to capitalize on that conversation, on this moment to not capitalize on this moment to not let the conversation die. Because, if anyone can sort of keep that conversation going, it's the media, and everyone's doing, Washington Post, New York Times, my good friend, Michael Schaefer, the Washingtonian, everyone is looking at this as sort of the conversation of our time and how we can push this forward because we have the platform. And we're very fortunate to have that platform. So, we are constantly looking at things that we can do to push that conversation. So after the protests, we reached out to the business community, business owners, executives. We reached out to some of our past awards honorees, Minority Business Leader Awards and Women Who Mean Business. And I reached out personally to several executives just to ask basically one question, which is, what can business leaders do to come together and push our community forward? And the responses that we got were really, really, they were really great. They were powerful. And we collected them, we've compiled them, we've posted them. I think this is the time. We called it Now is the Time, because this is the time. We can't keep having this conversation. It was, more than 5.5 years ago, I wrote a column after the night of the Ferguson riot, because it's just, you felt that change needed to come then, and 5.5 years later, we're still having this conversation. We cannot continue to have this conversation 5.5 years from now. We can't. And it has to come from us, from the business community, stepping up and helping push this forward.
So what are a couple of the business responses that you got that jumped out at you that you thought were really good news or really good ideas?
I think I was just really gratified to see. So some of the responses were very personal, and they reflected the pain. I am not in a position. I'm Indian. I'm not in a position to understand to the extent that others understand what this means to them on a daily basis. You know, it's the impact of this sort of story, of this sort of headline. It beats on you, right? So some of the responses were very personal and very reflective of that pain, which I think was incredibly powerful and incredibly brave and courageous. And then I was really gratified again to see, I mean, we had just as many white business owners and CEOs saying this is unacceptable. And again, you know, when you have whatever sort of the dominant leadership is of an organization, you know, if it has been white leadership, primarily white male leadership over the course of time, then it has to be that white male leadership that helps push this forward. And it was great to see those responses. So we're continuing our coverage. Anyone else who still wants to respond, we're continuing to add to that conversation. We're continuing to add to that compilation of responses so that the time is now. So anyone else who still wants to can still add to that conversation. But even since then, we've done cover stories about the sort of unequal economic impact of the COVID pandemic on workers of color and business owners of color and entrepreneurs of color. You know, a lot based on anecdotal evidence and survey responses out there, because again, there's no data from the SBA. I mean, you know, the number of entrepreneurs of color who said that they got a PPP was, you know, minimal. You know, I think it was like 12% of PPP funds went to Black or Latino entrepreneurs. It's just not enough. You know, we talked about, you know, how companies in our most recent cover story talked about how companies can take steps to diversify their workforces and what are specific things that they're doing to sort of invest in more economic equity in this region, you know, within their organizations and outside of their organizations. And within their organizations, there's a lot that businesses can do to promote better equity and make changes. I mean, from hiring, from interviewing, from promoting, from recognizing employees, from making their executive leadership representative, from, you know, from the lending perspective, from the venture capital and funding perspective. There are a lot of ways the business community can really step up and create real change.
So what's a leadership lesson that you've either learned or learned during this time?
So I think it's just, you know, me personally, I am not necessarily known for my awesome organizational skills. And so I think that has been, you know, in the pace of all of this and in the sort of scale of response to, you know, this pandemic, to this period of and calls for racial equity and racial justice. I mean, there's so much that I have had to sort of force myself to be a lot better and you know, bringing a lot of pieces together and coordinating and planning and making sure that, you know, everyone is on board and communicating. And I mean, communicating in this remote world it's making sure everyone's on the same page, you know, even within our small staff, it's hard. Adjusting. So sort of, you know, making sure that I'm sort of checking all the boxes that need to be checked. I think, you know, motivating people has been difficult. I mean, in the beginning, the fear was, you know, burnout and making sure that people weren't, you know, overextending themselves and they were taking care of their mental health and well-being. Now it's sort of lifting them out of maybe a malaise. It's like this has lasted far longer than any of us thought. It will last far longer still than any of us probably think. So making sure that they still feel motivated and feel activated and engaged. You know, I'm constantly trying to keep up with my email. So I know I owe many people email responses, and I love you all. It is it is a priority of mine. But so just sort of making sure that everyone feels a part and motivated and at their best, sort of helping people be at their best, including me, in a situation where it's very difficult to be at their best. And it's just my solution has been constantly trying to talk to people, just being on the phone. I mean, just constantly, or being on Zoom, face-to-face calls, and just constantly trying to gauge and make sure that they're okay. Everyone's doing all right. I think in terms of leadership, in this conversation about racial justice and equity, a big part of that is learning how to sort of take a spotlight. Like, again, anyone who knows me knows I like to be as far away from the spotlight as possible. I mean, there's a reason I hate even looking at myself right now on the screen at every meeting that I end up having. I mean, there's a reason I went into print journalism and not broadcast. I don't want to look at myself on a screen. I like the work to speak for itself. I like the business journal to speak for itself, but sort of taking a more public sort of stage has been a learning experience for me in the last year. We're almost pretty much at exactly 1 year of me having this role. And I really feel passionately and strongly about taking that leadership position to push this conversation forward again at the business journal that we've been talking about racial justice. So one new feature that we're actually debuting, and I would love to have LGW members participate in this as much as anyone might be interested in doing this, but it's a new feature that we're calling My Story. I'm calling that now. I mean, that may change, but right now we're calling it My Story. And it's basically a first-person column or account by business executives. And it's taking a look at, their story, where they came from, who they are, what made them into who they are, their background, their childhood, their culture that defines them, right? But it's also, and primarily, sort of their professional path to leadership and what sort of incidents of racism, subtle and overt, they've experienced along the way. What are some of the things that, people who don't wear their shoes don't realize happens on a regular basis to maybe women or people of color as they're navigating the professional workplace. And it happens all the time, right? But more powerfully than us telling that story is them telling that story in their own words. And so, why are we doing this? It's because change comes from a greater consciousness and a greater awareness and a greater understanding. And learning from other people's experiences helps inform that consciousness and understanding and awareness. And I think having these first-person accounts, these sort of thoughts and columns in their own words about, what some of our most successful leaders in Greater Washington have been through themselves, is probably the most powerful way of being able to do that. So I'm hoping that there's interest out there. I'm hoping that people want to tell their stories, but that's something that we're starting up. So just constantly trying to think of how to sort of push ourselves forward, push the business journal forward, push our reporters and staff forward, and elevating everything that we do.
Vandana, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your great insight. Thanks for all your comments. I'm going to ask you to give us a final word on when our chair, Mahan Talakoli, asked this. How do we push our region forward? How has this changed our region for the future? Everything that we've undergone or gone through the last 3 months.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the thing that we've learned from COVID is adjustment as a business community. I mean, if you search the word pivot on the Washington Business Journal, the number of instances of that word in just the past 3-4 months, is enormous. But I think what that is saying is that we've learned that there is no such thing as status quo. We have to constantly adjust. We have to constantly pivot. COVID just forced our business models to undergo, in some cases, major transformation, in some cases, sort of a slighter pivot. But, we must learn how to adjust. We must to survive. It's not easy, and it's a lot harder for some industries than others, and we don't have all the answers yet. But that has to be what the conversation is now. How do we survive in a much more virtual environment going forward? Because I do think some of this will be longer lasting. And then, in sort of the broader conversation about racial justice, it's sort of similar. We have to adjust. We have to embrace change. And we have to be open to change. We have to be open to our own unconscious biases. And it happens at every level of the organization. Top to bottom, left to right, we have to be open to change and and sort of acknowledging our unconscious biases, having a conversation about it, having an honest dialogue about it, and figuring out how to move past them. Because, if anyone needed evidence that business can be the impetus for real change, ask Dan Snyder. We have had generations or decades of, calls for the team to change its name. I wrote a column 7 years ago. I was one of a million who wrote a column about, calling on the team to change its name 7 years ago. What is making the difference now is, major sponsors asking for this to change, for the name to change. Nike and Target and Walmart pulling the gear. These are business impacts. These are painful business impacts. And there's a business case for changing the name now. And that has stemmed from business voices rising up, right? So if we can do that for the case of finally creating and adapting and adjusting and changing our system for actual racial equity and social equity. This is not just about racial equity, it's social equity, it's gender, sexual orientation, it's everything. It's if we can actually start that conversation and really finish that conversation, that would be enormous. This is our time. Now is the time.
Well, thank you so much. What a great conversation today with you. Hope you have a great rest of the day. Stay tuned. On Friday, we've got another conversation with Claire Burek from the Roslyn Business Improvement District. We've also just announced a 6-part anti-racist leadership series run by Howard Ross. So check that out as well. Anna, thank you again. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.